No is not a conflict word. So I know that might be hard to hear or understand, and you might not agree with it. But no can actually avoid conflict. No can actually just be an honest answer to a question. No can actually help people avoid resentment, anxiety, indecision. But so many people feel uncomfortable standing up for themselves. So many people feel uncomfortable saying no. The thought makes them so anxious and overwhelmed that they will do things that make them suffer. They'd rather personally suffer than let somebody else down or let somebody else experience disappointment or risk any type of conflict whatsoever. So the anxiety that people feel when they would like to say no is actually a feeling of that I am somehow in danger. I'm in so much danger that I'm not even going to consider no. And I know that that's not what you're thinking here with your frontal lobe, but that's what your old brain is telling you because of the amount of anxiety you're feeling when you want to say no. Because actually saying, nope, I don't want to go to the movie today. No, I can't add that meeting into my schedule. Or no, I can't help you with that. You're generally not in any kind of physical danger, but that's how your body is responding. So I want to help you understand why this might be so that you can change it. So I do want to talk about some pressures on all of us that cause this. And again, within balance, it is not a bad thing to say yes and to help others, really. But it's where it gets out of balance. It's where it is very one-sided and where it really is like a compulsion to say yes and a very extreme fear of saying no, that it becomes problematic. So let's talk about the pressures in 3 different areas. One is family, the next is cultural, and the last is kind of an innate human need. So within our family systems, you've probably seen some of my other videos, and if you haven't, I will link a handful of them at the end of this one about dysfunctional family roles. But generally, roles within families can become very rigid, inflexible, and the people who are supposed to be the people pleasers, caretakers, do-gooders are the ones who are supposed to do that, and then there are others who end up being takers. So this role gets ingrained in you very early, right? So that's one, the family dynamics. 2, cultural pressures. Okay, so within cultural pressures, we have different cultures have different attachments to independence and connection. Those cultures that tend to be more focused on societal cohesion and connection will probably have a stronger guideline about going along with, about saying yes to others. And I'm not making a judgment here, right? You could also judge certain cultures, maybe the American culture, as being too focused on independence and the independence of the individual. And neither of those extremes is great. But I do want to say about the cultures that really focus on cohesion, because in my 20 years as a psychotherapist, I worked with people from all sorts of cultures, from all different places around the world. And I would sometimes hear, well, in my culture, in my family system, you're supposed to do this. Like, this is cultural. It's the right thing to do. And yet, for each one of those clients, what I found is that even within their culture, the culture of cohesion, there were certain family members who were the ones who really focused on it and upheld it, and certain family members who were violating it, and it was okay they were violating it. So even within a culture that's very focused on cohesion, I'm pretty sure you have a family member or 2 who is a taker, not a giver, right? So it's worth digging into this a little bit more deeply. In general, amongst almost all cultures that exist right now, females are more taught to be people pleasers. Females are not rewarded as much for standing up for themselves or being independent or on their own when they're young, like even in grade school. Girls asserting their own needs gets a less favorable response from pretty much everybody. There's a great book called In a Different Voice. It's quite a few decades old right now. Carol Gilligan, researcher, expert in the topic. And she talks about how girls are socialized. When girls play in groups at a young age, they play very cooperatively. Boys go into hierarchy very early. Boys will be like, well, I'm the best at getting the basketball shot, but you're the best at math, and he's the best at baseball. So they're very good at putting themselves into a hierarchy. The girls avoid hierarchy, and there's a lot of research on this. And it's kind of interesting because there's an element of the girls' play. It's great to be cooperative, but it also means not asserting necessarily your individuality or where you disagree with the group or you standing on your own up for yourself, right? So those are very strong cultural influences, and they're just worth bringing into your own sort of internal processing on this issue. What holds values that you want to keep and stick to and what doesn't? And the third piece on this, what I wanted to talk about, is the innate human need to connect to others. Now, again, this varies among people, but for most humans, a social group is super, super important. And way back when, in caveman days, it was completely necessary for our survival. So being shut out of a group probably meant you would die, right? You would not have the protection of your group members, your clan, right, against wild animals, against marauding bands of other humans. You would not have that kind of group protection. And also it takes a lot of cooperation, right? And at that point, it took a lot of cooperation among those people to survive. That's not really true anymore. If there's a social group that doesn't really accept you into it right now, you can probably find a different one. We're still very interconnected, but there's not the same level of danger when you're excluded from a group, but our old brain still holds on to that. It's still kind of this innate anxiety that we have. And identifying that is really important because that's the anxiety we have to calm in order to change these patterns. So I'm going to give you some very practical tips on saying no without feeling guilty. But I also want to point to the deeper work and the deeper issues, because that's really where the long-term change will come in. And this is exactly what I focus on in the boundary course I have, the Ultimate Boundary Course. It really goes into exploring what emotions are coming up for you and how do you regulate those so that you can say no, really. And then also like understanding your values deeply so you know what to feel guilty for and what not to, right? Which I'm going to come back to. But the program leads you step by step over 8 weeks through a process that will transform your view of yourself, your view of others, your ability to set and enforce boundaries, and your ability to start saying no without guilt so you can say yes to those things that are super important to you. So guilt is a very useful emotion when it's applied correctly. Guilt tells us we did something wrong. And then when we feel that guilt, if we did something wrong, we can then change it. Generally, when you're in a situation where you're saying yes, but you really want to say no, you're not doing anything wrong. So it's just important to begin to really question this feeling of guilt, because we can have automatic feelings that drive us that aren't overly valid for the existing situation, and they might block us from feeling more congruent emotions, right? Emotions that are more congruent to the situation, which actually would be more useful for us. So if you're in a situation where somebody is really like in desperate need, and it would be very easy for you to give them something and you say no, well, yeah, okay, that might make sense to feel guilty for that, right? But that's not why you're watching this video. I know it. So bringing guilt out of the body and into the cognitive brain where you can analyze it, is this really something I need to feel guilty about? That's just something to pay attention to here. But let's go to the deeper emotions, which are the ones that end up being really reactive and automatic, which are the reason that you go immediately to that guilt or feel like a sense of terror if you're going to say no. So what emotions do come up for you when you think about saying no? What is the feeling that comes up? And if it's guilt, if that's the first thing that comes to your mind, go under that. Why are you guilty? Well, maybe you're guilty because your needs don't really matter, right? Well, where did you learn that? And you know that's not really true. So really, what are those emotions and how do you learn to regulate them? So people will say to me, well, I don't want to come off as selfish. Okay, well, why not? So what? Right? Sometimes selfish, you get called selfish when you're not doing what the other person wants you to do. Not necessarily selfish. But also, if the other person thinks you're selfish, okay, that's their opinion. So really looking into why is that a problem for you? And generally, it is this kind of innate anxiety that you have to please others to be safe, that you have to please others because that's just who you are and your needs aren't as important as other people's. So these are just very deep-seated beliefs that need to be brought to the surface to begin to change this in a substantial way. Now, on a more practical, immediate level, begin to take baby steps towards no, okay? So maybe the thing to do is to just put in place that you will always say, let me think about it. I'll get back to you in the morning, or I'll get back to you in an hour, whatever time frame seems reasonable. But if you go so quickly to that yes when you don't want to, and the thought of saying no is just so either terrifying or just like not even in your consciousness, see if you instead can say, let me get back to you. Because what that does is that allows you to do that emotional regulation I was talking about. That allows you to step away from the situation, be by yourself a little bit, think it through, take some deep breaths. What do you really want to do? You could even, if you want to bring in ethics, morals, big picture, what's the right thing for you to do? Sometimes you might think you have to respond right away, but you really don't. That's really responding to the other person's sense of urgency. So let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say your sister wants you to babysit her kids, but you already have plans that day. If saying no feels too out of the question, you can say, let me think about it. I'll let you know in the morning. You can say, oh, I have to check in on a few other things and I'll let you know tomorrow. Again, it gives you time to think it through. Your boss comes to you and is like, wow, can you start working on this project right away? And you don't think you can say no. You can say, let me check in on the other projects I have going on and I can let you know in an hour, right? So buy yourself some time. That's what I would call like sort of some of the baby steps in terms of moving towards making change on this issue. And then when you have more time to think this through, right, you could even write out for yourself a pro and con list. What's the pro of saying yes? What's the con, right? What's the pro to saying no? What's the con? Take a moment and actually write it out. It might be helpful. Okay, the pro is my sister doesn't get mad at me. The pro is I feel like I'm being a helpful family member. The con is I'm skipping the plans I made with my own kids, or I'm delaying my work, which I'm behind on, and then I probably won't sleep because I'll be worried about it, and I'm already not sleeping well, and blah, 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 right? A lot of cons. It'll impact my physical health. And again, I just want to be clear here. I'm not talking about a sister who never asks you for anything, who calls you up out of the blue and says, hey, I'm in a jam. Can you help me? Sure. Help out, right? But that's not usually where we're stuck. We're stuck with those people who are asking us over and over, or with the boss who gives us way too much and then we can never finish anything. So it's in those situations where this is the most problematic. Another thing to write into your pro column is it avoids conflict. Okay, but let's go into that a little more deeply. Who is that a benefit for? Are you really avoiding conflict? Or are you just taking on some inner conflict to avoid external conflict? And why does conflict have to be avoided? Anyway, going through a pro and con list where you really kind of dig into some of these issues, I think you'll learn a lot about yourself, and it will overall make things more of a choice. I'm choosing to. I don't have to. I actually was traveling with a friend this summer, and he's a teacher, and he was going back to school to prep, right? It's August. And he was like, I have to go back to work. And I was like, I always suggest people don't use have to. And he looked at me and he's like, but I have to. And I'm like, well, why do you have to? Well, I don't earn money. Okay, so you're choosing to because you want to, right? You're choosing to because you want to keep up your rent payments. It's a choice. If we get stuck in that feeling of like, I have to say yes here, we're not really acknowledging our own power, our own ability to make choices. So the pro-con list really helps you, right? He could write out a pro-con list. Okay, don't go back to work. Pros, more time he loves to write, he reads, more time to do all these fun things, more time to travel. Con, maybe won't have enough money when I retire. I might have to give up my apartment. Okay, a lot of big cons. Okay, so it becomes a choice. I don't know if that was a total aside here, but somehow it seemed relevant to begin to move this into the place where you have agency over it. That's really what we're trying to do. So again, learning those phrases to say no, very helpful. But unless you really go to that deeper work, unless you look into what are the negative core beliefs that is driving this behavior? Why did I develop this, and how do I change it on a deeper level? How do I calm some of those emotions that are coming up that aren't really congruent with the situation? That's where the real change will come from. So learning to revise those negative core beliefs, building your self-esteem. Often people say yes a lot, as I said earlier, because they want to be liked. Well, what does that mean? That you can't say no the way other people say no to things because you aren't likable? Or you're only likable if you say yes all the time? And then are those relationships worth anything? So that's really a self-esteem issue, and learning that you are likable just as you are, valuable just as you are, is super important. And then number 3, knowing that your needs and your wants matter. And there's a balance question here, right? Because we do sometimes have to sacrifice our wants for our loved ones and for our jobs, right? We do sometimes have to do that. But we shouldn't be regularly sacrificing our needs for somebody else's wants. So how you say no and what boundaries you set differ in all sorts of situations, but the basic concepts of the internal work that's needed to make you feel stronger, better about yourself, make you feel that you are okay as you are, right? That's common to all these situations. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next week.